Alrighty, welcome back to the Spell Reflect Guide series. We are now going to Neltharus. I don't know which one. It's one of those two. But realistically, there's not too much to talk about in this dungeon. A lot of the damage and a lot of the threats are purely physical. But let's go over what Spell Reflect can be good for, right? In this first area where you go over to Magma Tusk, the Thermitages have a channeled cast. In this cast, if you reflect it, they'll channel it back into themselves and do a lot of damage to themselves. So you can get some value there. There are some other fire damage like these explosive concoctions, but realistically, if you get hit by these, you just die. So there's no reason to try and reflect that anyway. So most of the time in this entire area, you are reflecting the conflagration and you're kicking the molten core and not being hit by frontals. And don't be hit by frontal, a little bit of swirly. That's kind of it. On Magma Tusk, I only use my spell reflect mainly for the magma eruption. If it's up and I get targeted by lava spray, that's another good thing to spell reflect. But realistically, you're not going to want to get hit by the charge. You're generally going to die if you get hit by the lava wave. So when he gets full energy, Magma Tusk goes the and does the big slam and puts a dot on everybody. But if you reflect right before that dot goes out, you'll mitigate the initial big hit, and you'll mitigate one tick of the magma eruption dot that's on you. And that's probably the best you're really going to get out of this boss. Like I said, you can reflect the lava spray, but most of the time I'm just reflecting the magma eruption trying to live, because that's one of the pain points of the boss, just how much AoE damage everybody is taking. Next, we're moving on over here into this area. There isn't really much value to be had. A lot of the danger and a lot of the damage here is physical. Like these bold ambushes are physical, leave a dot on you. They do a ton of damage. There is some fire damage for the trainees where they do a frontal for a little bit and they do little cone hits, but you realistically don't want to be hit by these anyway. So being hit by the Magma Fist sucks. So you're not really going to spell reflect that. The Bone Tenders, even though they do have a cast that they cast randomly on people and they do the Mending Clay cast, you'll kick this cast, but this is also physical, so you're not really going to be able to do that. But one thing you can do with these Hunters, because the Hunters are the actual problem in these packs, like the Hunters do most of the damage and will do kill your party the most with these bold ambushes, is if you use Die by the Sword. Die by the Sword is a parry from all physical and ranged hits if you parry it from the front, because you can't parry from behind you. As long as you're facing the mobs, and like a bunch of them start casting bold ambush because it's a really or they're because if you have there's a weak aura you can get that shows the cooldown of enemies' abilities, like on their plater on their nameplate profile. So because of that, what you can do is when this ability is about to be cast, because you can see it's up and ready, you can just have Die by the Sword up, and then that means that if they cast it on you, you'll just parry it and not take the damage or the bleed, which is really good. But now we get into Chargath, and Chargath is kind of weird, where I know a lot of people, what they do is when Chargath's like raging around, and when you blow up these slag eruptions, right? So when you pop the chain, you get a dot on you, and people spell reflect to get damage reduction on that. But weirdly enough, even though every iteration of Grounding Spear here is all physical damage, um, you actually like you can reflect the actual spear. Like so, when he puts the target on you and starts casting Grounding Spear, if you just throw reflect up, you'll literally reflect damage back into the boss that the spear would do to you. And I've done millions of damage back to the boss with this Grounding Spear. It's very, very weird. I don't know why it works that way. It's supposed to be a physical hit. I don't even know why. I just randomly sent Spell Reflect once, and that just worked, and I was like, oh okay, I guess. Um, so most of the time, or all the time, you're just going to reflect Grounding Spear so you don't take that damage, and then if you need Die by the Sword or Defensive Stance to live through the dots, depending on if your healer wants 1, 2, or 3, don't hit it by swirlies, all that good stuff, right? Um, just very weird that everything says physical, but you can reflect the damage back into the boss through these Grounding Spears. Quite odd. Through this area, once again, all the way towards the staircase, we still have the Hunters, Bone Tenders, Trainees. Already talked about those. Um, Up here, these lava flares, all they do is cast melt. They just cast it over and over and over again. So what you can do is after everyone's ran through their CC, you can kind of save yourself by having reflect available, so you can reflect the melt damage back onto the enemies. Most of the value is not taking the damage, like you do damage with it, but a lot of the value is just not taking damage from these melts, so that's good to use reflect for. You can use reflect if you want to walk like through the lava, but you shouldn't walk through the lava anyway. Back to these bone splitters. So these bone splitters, this pierce marrow cast and the dragonbone axe, are both, once again, if you have die by the sword, technically reflectable or parryable. So if you see it cast on you and you don't have a stun or anything available to stop that cast, I would recommend just throwing die by the sword up to make sure you're not being hit by that, because that does a ton of damage. If you pull this guy, some people do, some people don't. He puts a targeted circle AoE on everybody. That can be reduced through the Spell Reflect Magic DR. Same thing here with the flares. If you're not having any troubles with the flares, you're running with the Vengeance Demon Hunter. That's just controlling all the mobs. You don't have to worry about it. The only thing worth spell reflecting here is Forge Stomp. It just does, and it's just a big AoE damage to everybody in the areas. And there's a couple of these. I think there's this one here, and then there's these two blacksmiths to deal with before the boss. So you can just reflect the Forge Stomp there. There's more bone splitters here, so make sure you can use die by the sword or whatever. Reflect the melts, but we've already talked about all these mobs. Most of the value you're going to get from reflect, or what I would do with reflect on this boss, is for the blazing aegis. So he targets 3 people. He targets 1 person, and then the shield chains off of him. One thing that's interesting about the blazing aegis here, let me pop this open. We'll go into paint. So where the Aegis spawns are actually based on your character, right? So he puts the circle on you, and you're this little guy here. If you're facing this direction, then all of they spawn in an X, right? So they spawn like this from where you're looking. So if you're worried about hitting your friends or finding or getting a space where you can be safe, if you just make sure that everybody is, let's say the boss is here. If everybody is looking at a 90-degree angle away from the boss, it'll make a space near the boss safe where you can go to after you get hit by this blazing aegis, because it splits out on 45 degrees angles of an X. So you can decide where those pools are going to go, so you don't kill your friends, etc., by spawning it on top of them. But realistically, you can also meld the Blazing Aegis if you're playing Night Elf and he casts it at you. If you're the primary target, like he's literally targeting your character when he casts this ability, you can meld it mid-cast, and then he loses his target, and then all 3 people don't get hit by it, so that's pretty good. But what you want to do is the dot that lasts on you, so you get hit for a bunch of damage, and then there's an additional dot damage after. If you use Spell Reflect right as you get hit or a little before you get hit, so like it feels like half a second before you get hit, that means you have a 20% DR for the application of the damage, as well as every tick of the dot after that. That's probably the best value you're going to get. You can technically save it if you want to, and use it when he jumps. So he'll jump back to the anvil, so like this blazing hammer, he jumps back to the anvil and goes bum, 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 and does 3 waves of fire. I wouldn't recommend reflecting that, because it's mainly your healer's job to heal you through that. But if you can mitigate this damage from Blazing Aegis, it does way more damage than this Blazing Hammer. So you'll be saving yourself and your healer a little bit more headache by using your Reflect to reduce the hit and the dot damage off of that for the Aegis. We'll be going back out. There's Lavamancers again. For these mobs as well, leading up to the last boss, the only one of note really is the Blazewing and the bird. The bird just flaps his wings, does fire damage to everything, and pushes you back a little bit. You can use Spell Reflect to reduce the amount of damage you're taking from that on high fortified. That's probably going to do a lot of damage. Even though these volcanic guards are technically fire damage, uh, you're not really gonna like these. You're not gonna live through it if you get hit by it. So there's no reason to even try and reflect these, right? So you can use a reflect to just reduce the amount of damage from these Candescent Tempests. Um, Same thing with the Lava Man. Most people snap these Lava Mancers down onto this pack here because this is right above here. Um, but realistically, like I said before, don't walk in the lava, don't get hit by the lava. So you shouldn't need to spell reflect it, right? And on the last boss, I like to use spell reflect mainly on the magma shield. You can use spell reflect to reduce the amount of damage molten gold is doing to you because it actually does quite a bit. Um, but most of the time, I save my spell reflect for the magma shield cast for one very simple reason. It is because it spawns a bunch of swirlies on the floor. Everybody's using an extra action button to hit the boss with a button with a thing to make the shield go away. And because everybody's doing that, everyone's moving. Obviously, your healer is also moving, and your healer doesn't have time to plant and heal you at all. So reducing the amount of damage you take while the healer doesn't have the option to heal you, and then gets the option to heal you up after this backdraft occurs, and he's able to take a bunch of damage, so he has time to actually get you topped up. That's when I would mainly use my spell reflect or my other damage reductions, just because realistically, man, you can't. Like I said, you can send it on molten gold if you're doing like high tyrannical, and it's a problem. But if your healer can't heal you, you're not gonna live through it. So mitigating all of that damage that's gonna be incoming to you, while you're not gonna be able to obviously get healed, is the way I think it's best to do. But that's it for Neltharus. There honestly wasn't that much to talk about in this dungeon. Mostly because a lot of the abilities and a lot of the things that are dangerous in here are all physical damage. These bold ambushes, these dragon strikes, these dragonbone axes, the pierce man, it's all physical. So you can die by the sword to technically reflect those or just mitigate them because you'll parry them off and it won't take damage. But the only big real reflect value we're getting is off of Chargath. I think this molten gold we should be able to reflect that. I think that'd be good, but they don't want that, so it's also really weird. The molten gold fire cast that should be reflectable, you can't, but the grounding spear that does physical damage, you can reflect damage back into the boss. Very, very odd. I don't know why, but this is mainly where we're going to get our reflect value in terms of damage. Um, you might get some from these thermitages, but realistically, people using AOCCs, even if you reflected it, will stop your reflect damage. And but I do think if you can communicate with your group, a lot of the value you're going to get is going to be from saving a stop or just adding damage to these thermitages because they can be pretty dangerous in this area. But that's kind of it for Neltharus. It's very straightforward. There's honestly not too much to talk about. Nothing very interesting like no-code. But sometimes you just don't get that value, and sometimes that's just what it is. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.